Alright, ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome. Schubert here with a follow-up tutorial on how you can use a steering wheel and pedals setup in GTA V. In my first tutorial, I showed you how you can use a program called x360ce to basically emulate an Xbox 360 controller and therefore utilize your steering wheel and pedals in the vanilla GTA V and GTA V Online. Well, today I'm going to show you a couple extra steps and some extra tips and tricks that will allow you to use your steering wheel and pedals in a program called FiveM. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. Now, I'll be honest, I'm going to skip the whole, here's the website you go to, here's the button you click to download, here's how you do all this stuff. Instead, I'm just going to show you that I do have my 360ce program in a backups folder on a backup hard drive. You don't need it to be in your FiveM folder. And actually, I'll show you at least one reason why you don't want to do that, at least initially. You can see here I actually deleted the files that it creates. So we're going to go through this a little bit fresh. I'll try to put a timestamp in the description below so that if you've done this part already, you can skip ahead. But I just want to reiterate a few points as we go through. And don't worry, I'll also put a link in the description for this actual program and where you can find it. First thing that happens when you go to load it up is it asks if you want to create this DLL file right here, and you just click Create. Then it finds your device and asks if you want to search the internet for the settings. We will just go ahead and click Yes, click Finish, and it's going to do the same thing for my secondary device. So I click Yes, click Finish. Then you hear a nice little bling, and you see that the controller becomes visible. And that's exactly what we want. If you don't hear that Windows bling, or whatever your sound might be for your settings, then there's something that's not getting activated and you got to go back. Now I'm going to go through this part pretty quickly because I've done it once before, but basically everything that has an axis, I empty it. Every time you empty something, you should hear a bling. I'm going to edit that out because it gets annoying. And basically I'm going to start right here. So the first thing I do, your right trigger you know is your gas or accelerator. So I like to hit record and then just step on the gas and let off the gas. You know it's working when it glows. When you get that little dot that's glowing, then you know it's working. For me, on the trigger, it's I-axis 2. You can use this with a Logitech G29. I'm sure a 920 will work. I know my Thrustmaster TMX works. I'm sure there are a lot of devices that work with this program. Basically, I think if your device is found by Windows, it's going to work with this. I have yet to see where one doesn't work. So hopefully whatever you have will also work. Now that being said, with the triggers also here on the brake, one thing you can do is if you know the axis that it is, you can go into here under all these different options and you can select the correct one. For me, I know my brake is axis 6 and it's inverted. So there, now I'm pressing on my brake and it's glowing. I'm letting off and it's not. So there are multiple ways to do this stuff. You can either record or you can just go ahead and find it. Sometimes I like to record just to make sure that it is being accurately found, especially when it comes to the buttons, because on the Logitech G29, of course, that is set up for PlayStation. The buttons are going to be different than they are for the 360 or for the Logitech G920, which is for Xbox. Now, oddly enough, all of these buttons are set correctly for me on the G29. When I use my TMX, my Thrustmaster TMX, which is set up for Xbox, I have to actually program these in because they're not correct, which is very weird. Now, a lot of these things, you can set these up to be whatever button you want them to be. It doesn't have to be what I'm using. It can be whatever you want to use. I will point out once again with the D-pad, you want to make sure that it says D-pad 1 over here, because otherwise you can only program like 2 of these in and they don't work. As you can see here, all of them are working for me because they're glowing as I press them. It means they're working. When you go ahead and record your steering for the first time, your left stick is, of course, steering in GTA 5. So when you go ahead and record that, again, pay attention to where this dot is blinking because that's where you want to steer towards to start it off. So you can see here I'm turning left, and this little cross is, this little plus sign is going left, and now I'm steering right, and it's going right. If you do that wrong, it will be backwards, and you'll really anger yourself, to be honest. The left stick button, I think that's your horn. So on my G29, I like to make that my big plus symbol, or not plus symbol. The big button that looks like it has the enter symbol on it. That's what I like to have as my horn. It's nice and easy to find. And then your right stick is actually your look back. So I always record that as something else. Let's see, R3 maybe. There we go. Whatever you leave blank is going to be blank. It's the greatest system, I think, because you don't have to program everything in. As I stated in my last video, I did some other program at first, and I really had to program in every single thing to the point where I was using my clutch just to fill up a space. But that, I don't know, that program was odd anyways. Next up, you want to go to whatever your second controller is, and you want to program that as well. For me, that is a SATA side panel. Yes, that's used for Farming Simulator, but there are some buttons I like to program on here as well. So I'm going to go ahead and clear everything. Now, I went through and cleared everything, and you might say, well, Schubert, you could just hit clear down here on the bottom. And you can, but there are some settings overall that get cleared out that if you don't put them back in is going to make your life miserable. And oddly enough, even though I'm on controller 2, if I hit clear, it's going to clear things for controller 1 as well. And it just messes things up. So a couple of the things that I like to change here is, since I do use this thing for Farming Simulator, I get used to pressing some of the keys or some of the buttons for certain things. Like in Farming Simulator, button 17 is for entering and exiting your vehicle. I love to be able to press it for that. And then over here, we have your stick axis. So, of course, we can use the little joystick over here for our driving and stuff like that. Mostly I like to use it for camera movement, but I'll show you something as we go along here. If I hit record, let's see. It wants me to do x-axis, so I go to the right, and there we go, right and left works. And then if I hit record again, and go the up axis, so up and down works, and now I can go all around with it, and it all works. Now, if you're familiar with the SATA side panel, there's a little button on top that changes the mode, and I can actually go over here and also record the left analog stick. And I can go here and I can record the upper. So now I have the left analog stick. I click that little button to change the mode, and I have the right analog stick also controlled here. Now, right bumper is the handbrake. Sometimes I like to do the big button 21 for handbrake. I like to make sure my start is also button 1 over here. And then I think, if I remember right, I better make sure this goes D-pad. Well, no, wait. That doesn't have to. D-pad to the right is your lights. So I like to make that a button on here as well. So once we have that all set up, we have both of our controllers set up, and you can have up to 4 controllers. So like I said, if you have a joystick, if you have one of those heavy hauler button boxes, you can connect all 4 of your controllers at the same time, set them all up, and then move on to this next step. So this next step, if we go to Advanced under each controller, we can select Combine this controller and make sure it says button or controller 1. Make sure it says controller 1. Go back to the General tab. You can see I'm still lit up here. I'm still at full capacity. So whatever I do here is still going to happen here under this controller. What does that mean? Well, I'll show you. When we hit Advanced over here, we can click Combine the controller into controller 1. Go back to the General, and you can see what I do here on the steering wheel happens here on controller 1. Now the very important thing is go over to Options in the top and click Enable Combining. You'll hear that little bling. You'll see that your attached devices will turn red like this one. If I had more, then they would turn red as well. And then you can go back to controller 1 and you can see that not only does what I do with the steering wheel react on controller 1, but what I do with my joystick that I set up on controller 2 also works on controller 1. And now you will see that controller 2 is kind of not really grayed out, but it's translucent. It's not visible. It's not there. And so that's because everything that happens now happens as controller 1. And this is great because I think as far as GTA 5 goes, you can only have one controller hooked up at a time. Now, I do think if I had an Xbox 360 controller attached at the same time, I could still use that without enabling it in this program. I'm not 100% sure on that. You might have to do some more digging if you also want that to be available to you. Now, before I skip ahead to one of the last big steps that we need to know about, I'm going to go ahead and show you a little bit of advice, a little bit of a tip, a little bit of a trick over here on the left thumbstick. Now, in my previous video, I was using my Thrustmaster TMX racing wheel. In that video, the anti-dead zone was at 23% and the dead zone was at 0. For some reason, the settings that are found on the Logitech G29 go to a dead zone of 29%, which is huge, and 0 anti-dead zone. So basically, I have to steer my wheel almost to the 360, almost to 360 degrees before it will connect in the steering, which doesn't make any sense to me. So here is what I have found out. For my wheel, for your wheel, it might be a little bit different. Toy around with the numbers, toy around with the percentages. But in my wheel, I like about a 4% dead zone. It gives me just enough wiggle room in the middle that I'm not all over the place with little tiny adjustments. Then I like about a 25%, give or take, anti-dead zone, which means that that little bit is going to jump up. It kind of looks goofy in the game when you get going because you can look outside your car and you could see where all of a sudden your wheel just turns to the side awkwardly. It just kind of doesn't move and then it shoots over. And then take a look at the sensitivity. You can click on this to make it less sensitive in the center. And what it'll do, as you see, is it'll create kind of a sensitivity curve. Now, the odd thing is, well, not the odd thing, the smart thing is, we actually want this to be inverted. Because the way the game handles the 360 controller, it's not really that sensitive in the middle. And so if your anti-dead zone is all the way down, your sensitivity is all the way down, your dead zone's all the way down, what ends up happening is that your steering wheel feels sluggish. It feels like what you do in the middle of the wheel means absolutely nothing. With this, however, as you're going down the highway or as you're making a turn from a red light, you can see that that first little bit there has a bit of an arch to it, and it'll feel a little bit more realistic, like a 1-to-1 ratio. Now, I am not done testing out the percentages that I like, that I enjoy, but I will say that so far the 25% on each one feels pretty damn good. So there's my tip, there's my trick. Give it a 25% anti-dead zone, 4% give or take dead zone, depending upon how your wheel feels, and a 25% sensitivity with the invert checked. Make sure it's inverted. And for me, this works on my G29. It also works on my Thrustmaster TMX. So there's two wheels where I use the same percentages. But once again, I have a little bit more tinkering that I want to do with that. Now, some of the last settings, the most important settings, are up here in the game settings. What you want to do, these two are already checked for me for some reason. When you load it up, it might just be that the 1.3 is selected. You want to make sure that 1.3 and 1.4 are selected. You want to make sure those two are that way. You want to make sure that those two are checked. And then you want to hit Synchronize Settings down here. Now, what does it mean if you have 32-bit game or 32-bit operating system or whatever? I'm not 100% sure. All I know is that I have 64-bit, and so those are the two that I select. And then I hit Synchronize Settings, and it says, oh, X input files are missing. Just click OK, and it's going to go ahead and create those. Before I close out of this program, I want to mention something else. I have toyed around with force feedback with this wheel and enabling force feedback and all this kind of stuff. Now, as you can see, it's already set up this way. I have not disabled it. Also here in the advanced, I've messed around with the force feedback pass-through. I'm going to go ahead and test this again, but the last time I had enable force feedback checked, the program did not want to load into FiveM. It had some really odd issue where it did not want to load up. But once we're all said and done, once we have our sticks set up, once we have our pedals all set up, we can go ahead and click Save over here in the lower right, and then you can just close the program. Now, there are 3 files that this creates. It creates these 2 DLL files, and it creates this .ini file. What you want to do with those files is actually you want to select the 1.4 or 1_4 and the ini at the same time. Copy them, Control C if you don't know. If you hit Control and C, that copies. Go over here to your FiveM folder. Mine happens to be located on my desktop. Wherever you located your FiveM folder, make sure that you have run it at least once so everything is set up. Then go into your FiveM application data, double click on bin to open that up, click in it somewhere, and Control V to paste. Now you'll see it put the ini file and the DLL file down here for me. You do not want to replace this 1.3 DLL file that is already in the FiveM folder. You do not want to overwrite that. Now, I told you I would show you what happens when you try to run the X360 program inside of here. Basically, it doesn't initialize. It never fully initializes until you load up FiveM, and so therefore it's kind of useless to try to run it out of your FiveM folder because you'll never be able to see if you set up your stuff correctly. The only thing really I think that setting it up here would allow you to do is change your dead zones around, save it, and have it save right there within the folder. One last thing before we jump into a server, and that is simply the fact that if you want to really customize your experience, play around with what your operating degrees are, what your wheel operating range is. For me, in my Logitech, I love to have it at 900. And the reason I put my percentages on the sensitivity and everything where I did is because with the sensitivities there and the operating range at 900 degrees, it almost, because it's not a simulator, it almost feels like playing something like American Truck Sim or Farming Simulator or something like that. Lastly, if you have yourself a Logitech G29 or G920, because of the way the G keys operate, you can go ahead and set yourself up with a certain profile. Like if I wanted to, I could select a default profile. And then you can create a G key for certain options in the game, like putting on your seatbelt, or here I have turning the engine on and off. And then you can put that to certain button presses, which is pretty freaking cool. So like if I want to turn the engine on and off, I could change that to button 12 over there in the lower left. If I want, I think I have seatbelt here somewhere. Oh, there it is, seatbelt. You could put that in there as well. Now when I press one of those two buttons, it doesn't perform the regular button 8 press. It will actually do, in this case, if I edit command, it'll do Control Z, and that will fasten my seatbelt. For engine on and off, if I go to the edit command there, it will actually type this out. It will press T, which is to talk. It'll type out /ENG, and then it'll hit enter. And I just have to wait for that to play out. And you might have seen that already in some of my videos, but I just have to wait for that to play out, and then the engine will start up or shut off. Pretty cool, huh? All right, you see then once we get into FiveM here, we have our lovely steering wheel and pedals all set up. Now, as you load FiveM, you should hear, as I probably run a stop sign, you should hear a little bling occur that lets you know that it is actually functioning properly. That it is actually, hey, it's my turn. It should let you know that it is actually loaded up and ready to go. Now I'm going to turn here towards the airport, and hopefully there's nobody here to really mess with me. But I'll just show you. Once again, I've got my wheel at about 900 degrees, or at exactly 900 degrees. I have the sensitivities and the anti-dead zone at 25%. And you'll see, I wish I had a wheel cam. I'm sorry, I don't have any kind of fancy schmancy cameras. But you'll see that the steering is all very smooth. Like right here, I'm to 90 degrees on my wheel. And right about here, I'm at a full rotation. So I'll show you what that kind of looks like from the outside. You will see some goofy things like if I stop and I don't move and I turn my wheel, you see how it turns smoothly? Turns pretty smooth. But once I turn it a little bit and then I hit the gas, sometimes it will kind of jitter or jolt. Like if I got it turned a little bit. See that? There we go. That was a good example. Sometimes it'll do that, which is just kind of a... There, it did it again. I think that has more to do with how GTA 5 handles steering at certain speeds, because it wants you to be... I don't know, it tries to compensate for going fast and using that 360 controller and making the handling a little bit easier for people is pretty much what it does. So for what we have today, I think it works pretty damn well. I know I rambled there at the end, but thank you for watching. If you have any questions, feel free to ask down below in the comments. I'm going to put some links in the description, and hopefully you can follow along with those. And yeah, just have a great time driving around in GTA 5 with the wheel.